Thank you for joining us, everyone, today. This is the UCLA Westside Bruins career Fireside chat with Jay Samit. I am Morvareed Salehpour. I'm a double Bruin and a business and tech attorney at Salehpour Legal. I work with small and mid-sized businesses and startups to help them as outside general counsel with their contracts and tech transactions and legal issues around data privacy and IP licensing. And I have with me today Jay Samit, who is also a Bruin. He is a dynamic entrepreneur who is widely recognized as one of the world's leading experts in disruption and innovation. He has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for startups, advises Fortune 500 companies, transforms industries, revamps government institutions, and for 3 decades has been on the forefront of global trends. He is former independent vice chair of Deloitte Consulting, has helped grow pre-IPO companies such as LinkedIn, has been on a NASDAQ company CEO, has held senior management roles at EMI, Sony, and Universal Studios, and pioneered breakthrough advancements in various areas such as mobile, digital distribution, and spatial reality. And his partners and associates include amazing individuals such as President Bill Clinton and Sir Richard Branson, among many others. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jay.
Thrilled to be here.
So, Jay, one of the issues we're going to, be talking about today is the future work, which is a much talked about topic these days, and something that we have to address as individuals, businesses, and a society, particularly as some economics forecasts that given the unexpected exponential growth of fourth industrial revolution technologies like AI, there may be up to 40% unemployment in 30 years. However, it seems that we're not giving enough focus to these issues in this space. And one of the key issues is this painting structure of work and how it's led to an increased shift in the gig economy model and increasing entrepreneurship. I myself, as a business and tech lawyer, have seen an increase in clients setting up new businesses, particularly during the pandemic. And your new book, Future Proofing You, is about the entrepreneurship journey. Can you kind of share a little bit with us about the premises of the book and some key takeaways for would-be entrepreneurs?
Wow, was that a question or a soliloquy? So let me start with half of all jobs will disappear this decade. Won't be distributed equally. And most people start off thinking about manual labor jobs. Anything that can be automated will be automated. And it's easy to see that truck drivers will be replaced by autonomous vehicles. But legal, 80% of lawyers will be replaced by AI. You don't need people to write the same contracts and formulas over and over again. It can be done by expert systems. An AI system can replace a radiologist. A radiologist may see 1,000 or 2,000 patients in their life. An AI system can scan millions and millions of images and get complete accuracy. So you're going to see middle management disappear. You're going to see a massive change. And all of these were accelerated by the pandemic. So when I look at what happened in our nation's capital in January, what I saw were thousands of people feeling left out, left behind, fighting over leftovers. The bottom 140 million Americans now own less than 1% of this country. And the top 100 richest Americans actually doubled their net worth during this past year. Prior to the pandemic, every 48 hours, there's a new self-made billionaire. That's with a B, like Bruins. Now it's every 36 hours. So my question is, what are those people doing differently? And so I wrote my first book, Disrupt You, to teach people how to create success and create value. And it grew out of teaching this at Crosstown at USC, where I've had students do $100 million their first year. And so I wrote the book and it went all over the world. It's in a bunch of languages. It comes out this year in Urdu and Croatian and just keeps on changing. People are thirsting for this knowledge. And I get lots of what I call love letters, emails from people that it's changed their life. And that's much more fun than when you're a CEO and you get hate mail all day long. But I got this one email from a millennial that said, this is all motivational, but I could never do it. And that ate at me. And so I decided to do a crazy experiment, and that's the basis of future-proofing you. Could I take a young immigrant here in LA with no social network, grew up on welfare, whose parents were on welfare, and mentor him 1 day a week? And spoiler alert, if you're reading the book, he goes from couch surfing homeless to self-made millionaire in under a year. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I took those mentoring sessions and compressed them down to what I call 12 truths. If you follow these 12 truths, you'll have the same results. And UCLA was a great education, top institution, and it absolutely does not prepare anyone for the real world. And I could say the same about any school. And I used to joke about all the MBAs that have worked for me over the years and waste of space. And when my son graduated top of his class from Harvard Business School, he said, Dad, you're right. They really don't teach anything about the real world in these places. So why is it that we teach people to be employees? We teach them enough math and enough reading to work for somebody else and make their dreams come true. But yet most of us don't have a clue of how to do it ourselves. And our well-wishers, parents and teachers, kind of dissuade us because they don't want us to feel the pain that they felt before they gave up on their dreams. Apologize for that phone. So I just flipped the table. And if you can demystify the process, it suddenly becomes very accessible for anyone, anywhere. And so the single biggest change post-pandemic is you no longer have to live in a major city or even in a first world nation. Remote workers are the new norm. So from out 15,000 years of civilization, if you were starting a company, you had to hire the best people within 10 miles of you. Now you can hire the best people on the planet. And you're one click away from 6 billion consumers. You only have to be right for a nanosecond to make a fortune or change the world. So it's really not about making money, it's about making impact. So if you want the quick answer, you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
That is so true, Jay. Do you think entrepreneurship is right for everyone or only certain individuals? And is it too late for someone to begin the entrepreneurship journey?
As has been famously recounted many times, there was a guy in his late 60s on Social Security who had never had a business or anything, but he had a great fried chicken recipe and he started going door to door to restaurants. And the first 1,000 said no, but he didn't stop. And Colonel Sanders and KFC was the result. So no, anybody can do it. I've heard from people in Pakistan. I've heard from people, countries I've literally had to look up on the globe because I didn't know where they were, of people that have applied these things. The book became #1 in Vietnam. And what shocked me about that was I had a different vision in my head of a communist nation that, was emerging out of being in poverty. People were thirsting. We're used to having the icons of Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, and we can see a path. Now everybody can see that path. So it's never too late. Anybody can do it. I didn't set out to be an entrepreneur. I bought into society's promise. Go to school, go to good college, get good grades, and live happily ever after. Mm-hmm. I graduated in a recession. There were 0 jobs. And it also dawned on me when I was applying for jobs straight out of school, that if a job exists, that means somebody else already had that job, which means there's people more experienced. Why should anybody ever hire me? So early on, I realized that you either have to be the best in the world at what you do or the only one doing it. And if you're the only one doing it, by definition, you're the best. Yeah. So when this young man, Vin, who I mentored in Future Proofing You, what do you want to do? What do you think you can do? He said, well, I think I understand social media. I could do social media for other people. A kid on welfare is not suddenly going to get Nike or Coca-Cola or Ford Motor as clients. The only people they know are other broke people, and there's millions of people doing social media. How are you going to do it? So why not look at what people are talking about in society, look at what's in the zeitgeist, and make yourself the social media expert for that one narrow thing. Now you have no competition. Get that first client, and now back to your MBA speak. Once you have that first client, even if they're for free, you now have a case study that you can show everybody else the results that you did for them. So the first client that was paying him like $500 a month, by month 3, he had clients paying for the same amount of work, $30,000 a month. His first month, he did more than $50,000. His motivation level went through the roof. He didn't believe this was possible. He grew up with a scarcity mindset. So when we were in elementary school, we were taught business was this. Jay buys a banana for $1 and I sell it to you for $2. The way I make money is taking money from you. That's not how millionaires and billionaires are made. They actually are more like the Midas touch. They make money from thin air, money that wasn't made by the Federal Reserve. If I came to you and say, I saw my last company was purchased by News Corp for $200 million, okay? I'm starting a new company. I'll sell you 10% for $10,000. What do I now have? $10,000 in cash and $90,000 in stock that I can hire people, buy, trade, do whatever. That's how these massive fortunes are created. And when you start understanding how corporate America works, that CEOs are incentivized not to create new products. They're incentivized, and I've been a NASDAQ CEO, and I'll never do that again, so I'll tell you the truth. They don't care about shareholders. They don't care about employees. They don't care about customers. And the reason I tell you this is because they care about how the board wants them to act. And the board pays CEOs small salaries and a huge incentive if the stock hits X, Y, or Z. And if it hits that magic number at the end of the quarter, they back up the Brinks truck to your house and generations don't have to work. So what do you think they're focused on? Well, if you're a genius, you'll come up with new products that change the world and you hit that number. If you're a mere mortal, you'll stop R&D, you'll stop spending, you'll slash payroll, you'll cut every cost. So for one glorious moment, you hit your number and the company is no longer a sound company, which is why when the pandemic hit, so many companies needed bailouts because they didn't have 3 months of capital. They didn't have anything. But the flip side, now that you understand that, is if you're a CEO, you'd rather overpay substantially to a CapEx purchase to buy a startup that has a product that you can sell instantly and scale than to spend the years of losses to get to that stage. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Silicon Valley machine works. Yeah. So you have no competition when it comes to doing new things. And there's always something new. And you don't have to invent some core technology. You don't have to, you know, my favorite example of the year is a 17-year-old high school woman. Science fair. I am the prototype. I actually made the baking soda and vinegar volcano. That was my science fair. I learned nothing, but it was fun doing arts and crafts and making the volcano. She realized, and no parents were doctors or scientists, she's sitting there and realized the number 4 cause of death in the US is hospitals. Not what you go in for, just being in a hospital. Infections. And make a long story short, when you have surgery, infections are a huge problem. So what if you had sutures that change color if they were infected? She starts playing with different vegetables at a different pH balance. Make a long story short, smart enough to patent this. Okay, so in high school, she's already a millionaire set for life, but what else is she going to do? How much of a failure do I feel like? You know, when I see people that are doing it. There was a 14-year-old girl who was assigned to make a little soccer game using a neural network, you know, basic computer class. But when she came home from school, her mom was crying because her aunt was diagnosed with breast cancer. So this 14-year-old says, well, why don't we make a neural network that does the same thing for breast cancer? And now she saves 40,000 lives a year.
Amazing.
You know, it doesn't have to be complex. And I have a process in future-proofing you of how to get 90 ideas by the end of a month, how to sort those ideas for that which you're most passionate about and that have the largest market, and how to go ahead and do that. And it's as simple as that. So I think if you show people the steps, then it's an easier path.
Definitely something that at least lets people have a pathway to do that. Do you think, Jay, that the steps that maybe a new alumni should be taking to set themselves up for success in this entrepreneurship journey is different from someone who's further along in their careers, or is it similar?
So I speak at a lot of colleges. And so my standard advice, because everybody, should I go out and be an entrepreneur right now? Take any job that will give you skill sets that you don't have. If you're at a job where you're not learning, where they're just paying you enough to show up and not enough to care, you trade a day of your life, it turns into a week of your life, a year of your life. You're going to wake up one day and realize that you gave up the greatest gift you'll ever have, your life, for what? The purpose of life, in my mind, is to live a life of purpose. Mm-hmm. And so many people, you know, the third truth in the book is about harnessing fear. So many people are immobilized by fear. What if I fail? What will people think? What if I lose my money? What if I lose other people's money? At the beginning, when you're getting out of college, your kids don't need braces. Yeah. You know, unfortunately, we have a generation graduating with a mortgage but no house because of student debt, but that's a topic for another day. So take the risks, learn, because when you fail, you don't end up where you started. You either earn or you learn. But either way, you're propelled forward. You get to success by failing. Think of playing a video game. You don't sit down and boom, I'm at the end of the game, yay. You hit an immovable wall and you hammer that thing until you finally figure out how to get past it. And guess what? Then there's another obstacle. Yeah. Obstacles are just opportunities in disguise. Entrepreneurs do not sell things, they solve things. No one ever went into a hardware store to buy a 1/4-inch drill bit because they wanted a 1/4-inch drill bit. What they wanted was a 1/4-inch hole. So they had to buy the drill bit. So entrepreneurs don't sell things, they solve things. Solve for a few people, you have friends. Solve for 1 million, you're wealthy. Solve for 1 billion people and you change history. Mm-hmm. We're so interconnected. Each of us has the ability to change the future of this planet. Endless growth, the typical tenets of capitalism, that's broken. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a flag-waving communist. I'm a diehard, capitalist. But we have to move into now sustainable capitalism. You can't consume 4 times the Earth resources on one Earth. Yeah. It defies the law of physics. But think of all the opportunities as companies now want to get ahead of what's going to eventually be government regulations requiring more sustainability. Mm-hmm. When Walmart figured out that their second biggest cost after employees was electricity, they went full tilt in how to get LED lighting, and they cut $100 million a year out of costs. They didn't do it to be green. They did it to make green. Mm-hmm. And when they did that, Target suddenly has a Target on their back. Target now is the largest installation of solar panels in any corporation in the world. So all these are huge growth opportunities. And you don't have to invent the solar panel. You don't have to invent anything. You just have to take something that exists and solve a problem where it wasn't being used.
That is so true, Jay. And that kind of brings up an interesting point that you sometimes see some of these bigger companies not really address because of that whole tension with capitalism is often, if there is a incentive in the capitalist world to do some good, such as adopt sustainable technologies, they will do that. But often they don't necessarily consider the social impact of what they're doing, whether that is for the environment or for example, divisiveness in our society. How do you suggest that maybe entrepreneurs are looking to scale their businesses, but still want to take into consideration social impact? Is that something they can do, or do they need to deprioritize something like that given how the capitalist structure?
So you have to have your priorities straight. The purpose of a business is to make money. Now, you can make money by making cheaper bullets. Doesn't sound like the way I want to spend my life. Or you can make money by something that improves the quality of life. but the focus of the business is making money. Anybody can design shoes and sell shoes. Maybe you love your shoes, maybe you don't. But when Tom's came out with the idea for every pair you buy, someone that's never owned a pair of shoes gets shoes on their feet. Suddenly the customer feels better about the product. Employees want to work at that place, and you've changed the whole trajectory of the company. So it wasn't social good for social good. It was social good for the bottom line. The two aren't in conflict. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people come to me that just have this social good idea, but no tie to the bottom line. Well, then start a 501c3. That's called charity. Okay. There are so many problems and injustices that we all see and experience. Solve them. It's a huge market. If you have no problems in your life, you won't make it as an entrepreneur. But if you have problems, odds are other people have those problems. And you just have, I tell the story of a mom, and parents can relate to the story, and this is in future-proofing you. It's a middle school week. Her junior high school daughter has to make some presentation. She's writing on poster board and she messes it up. Mm-hmm. She's crying, "Mommy, go back to the store, get me a new piece." Da, 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 da. Mom relents. She's tired, she's exhausted. But before she gives that piece of poster board for her daughter, she takes a yardstick and makes little fine lines so her daughter will write straight on it. In the morning, she's like, "Why don't they sell poster board like that?" Make a long story short, she got a patent, went to the biggest manufacturer, and she's made about $5 million. No employees. She solved the problem. The problem doesn't have to be, climate change. Mm-hmm. Little basic problems, and we all have them.
That is very true. Yeah, there's so many entrepreneurs you hear about where it's not some complex, tech always, right? A startup doesn't have to be a tech company. It could be anything.
Well, I disagree with that. Good, we got some controversy. So one of the chapters in the book is every company is a tech startup. So if I would give you $1 million and tell you to go back 10 years and you could buy one stock, the most successful tech company of the past 10 years, who would you buy?
I don't know what was around, but maybe Apple. I know they were around 10 years
ago. So
it
wasn't Apple, wasn't Facebook, wasn't Google, wasn't Amazon. Turn over all the cards. Domino's Pizza. Say, how's that a tech company? When they went app-centric, when they could have a direct relationship with the customer, when they could market to the customer, when they could do market research, when they could do everything. The majority of the employees of corporate Domino's work in IT. Yeah. And their stock outperformed all those tech giants that I've just mentioned, okay? You have to think of everything. When you go to find something, where do you find it? On your phone. When you communicate with somebody, where do you do it? We live our lives digitally. The majority of the money you make goes for digital goods. Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think all these businesses are connected because they are all in the cloud if they're going to be successful and have data, but they still don't see
life insurance, health insurance, credit card, all these things are just pure digital.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we get into music and movies and Netflix and all that type of stuff. So why wouldn't you think of your business in those terms? And it doesn't matter what the business is. But the second you realize that you were living in a digital age, why not take advantage of all the advantages that brings with it?
I agree. And there's so many small businesses that don't take advantage of the data they have, right? They don't do the...
So data analytics, a huge thing. I mean, for those that just graduated, and I say this in semi-jest, here's the secret to get to making $300,000 a year this year with no work at all. Write on your resume that you graduated with a degree in data analytics from UCLA. Instantly, Apple, Facebook, Google will fight to hire you. Okay, Google hires you, let's say. Turns out you were a poetry major. Takes them about 90 days to figure that out. You get fired. But here's the good part. For the rest of your career, you're a former data analytics engineer from Google. There is such a shortage. And one of the things that this country really messed the boat on is limiting foreign worker visas of skill sets. You know, well, they're taking our jobs. No, if I'm a CEO and I've been a CEO of a multinational and I can't bring workers in here, I rent a room in the Philippines, I rent a room in Bosnia, it doesn't matter where. There's PhD engineers that are just as good and work for 10 cents on the dollar. I went to the White House, I won't say under which administration, with the following suggestion: why don't we limit those visas to zip codes? So now Google, you want to bring in 5,000 engineers? Fine, but they have to be in Detroit, where you have buildings, you have sewers, you have infrastructure, but you have no jobs. And those people then end up revitalizing the restaurants and the dry cleaners and the local communities. And we can bring back our urban centers that are empty except for infrastructure. Yeah. So there's always a new solution.
The really kind of interesting idea there. I know one of the things that is a kind of new development is with the pandemic, we did see that some of our leaders recognized that there had been a lot of consolidation of a lot of our kind of tech industry, like resources like semiconductors in foreign countries. So there has been an effort to bring a lot of that back. Do you think that in any way affects future industries or the future work for people in the US themselves?
So I sit on a board with a fellow from Foxconn. Foxconn's who manufactures your PlayStations, your Xboxes, your iPhones, blah, blah, blah. They got a lot of headlines when they said they're bringing a factory to the US, okay? Great. What they built now are called lights out factories. There's no lights in the building because there's zero employees. Nobody wants to spend, go watch Charlie Chaplin, you know, nobody wants to spend their life on an assembly line, okay? That's a waste of your being, and it can be automated. When I graduated UCLA, I thought the world would get into this stuff much quicker, but I remember in the 1980s going to McDonald's, and I noticed that their cash register doesn't have numbers on it, had little pictures, little shake, medium shake, big shake. The average customer has a higher literacy rate than the average employee. So I said, why don't you just put in a touch screen and let the customer fill it out and just save, you know, if you save one employee a shift times 14,000 locations times 3 shifts, it adds up. Nah, right? Now that you raise minimum wage and now that we're paying people not to work and nobody can find that labor, go into McDonald's now and there's the touch screen. Go into other chains and it's the app. So when your car is recognized at the drive-through window, it knows who you are and it comes right to you. Yeah. So all the types of jobs that we take for granted, you know, are disappearing. For the big giant companies to stay around, what they're going to be making their money from in 5 years is not what they make their money from today. Remember, Apple was a failed computer company. Couldn't get above 6% market share year in, year out. So they tried to pivot. They went after the Walkman. They said, let's try consumer electronics. And that went great. At the time they decided to come out with a phone, Nokia had almost 50% global market share. A fool's errand. There's a video of Ballmer, who was then head of Microsoft, laughing when he saw the first iPhone. But here's the opportunity. I don't expect anybody that's hearing my voice right now to sit down and say, I'm going to invent an iPhone. If you can, you know, you're a genius. You shouldn't be wasting your time listening to me. But when the iPhone came out, think of all the apps and all the fortunes that have been made from app-based companies, from simple apps to whatever. But the first year, let me tell you 2 of the top 10 best-selling apps. The Fart app, okay, and a game with kittens, okay, which is another way of saying nobody saw the opportunities right in front of them. I have a whole chapter dedicated in Future Proofing You to a new $1 trillion market where my clients, Google, Facebook, and Apple, are spending billions and billions, again, building the infrastructure for, but they're not doing the apps. And you go, well, I'm not an engineer. Steve Jobs built a $1 trillion company, first $1 trillion company. You've written as much code as he has. Wasn't an engineer. Here's what you need. You need insight and perseverance. Everything else can be hired.
Yeah, that is true. And one thing that a lot of, I think, separates entrepreneurs and successful businesses is that ability to be flexible, retrain, adapt to situations as they arise. How do you kind of, how does somebody prepare themselves for that, or actually set themselves up for success in that kind of scenario?
Well, what you learned in college isn't going to help you. Okay. And if I was you came to me and I was your doctor, your primary physician. And I said, I graduated UCLA Medical School 35 years ago, and I've read nothing since. You'd run out of the office. Okay. Why should anybody hire you or work with you if your skills aren't current? You have to commit to lifelong learning. But the great thing about lifelong learning is you're one click away from all of mankind's knowledge. There's no field that you couldn't self-educate and become an expert at today. You know, this isn't the dark ages where books are locked away in some tower, you know, for the nobles and the clergy. So what do you want to learn? What problem is motivating you to solve? And so motivation is the key. The other thing, which I really didn't cover in Disrupt You, there was a big oversight, is we have this mythology of the self-made man or woman. Mm-hmm. There's no such fucking thing, okay? Name a Fortune 100 company with no employees. I'll wait, okay? It just doesn't exist, okay? I used to be president of EMI. That's some of the Beatles, Queen, Coldplay, you name it, Beach Boys. I remember being at Wembley Stadium, 100,000 screaming fans, our artist on the stage all by himself, and they're feeling his heart to theirs, that connection, that the epitome of the self-made man. They don't see the lawyers and the managers and the songwriters, the musicians and the hairstylists and the wardrobe person that makes the ratty t-shirt that looks like he slept in it. There are hundreds of people behind the scenes. So you're going to need a series of mentors. Everybody's had mentors. Oprah Winfrey had Barbara Walters, okay? Zuckerberg had Steve Jobs. I mean, the number of people that want to help you, if you don't get back to that mythology of dog eat dog and we have a zero-sum game, if there's values created from the mind, then now you understand why people want to help you. And I teach people how to use LinkedIn to find those people. And it's not emailing a stranger, hey, will you be my mentor? I get 1,000 of those every day. That's like walking into a bar in Westwood and going, hey, you want to have my baby? It doesn't work. But why wouldn't you want to have the expertise of others to shorten your journey, to swing that machete ahead of you to clear some of the brush? You're still going to make mistakes. But why make mistakes that are why not avoid the avoidable ones, all right? So, you know, and I didn't learn that till way late in my career. I have to do it on my own. If they're so smart, why don't they start the company I did? And that type of arrogance, you know, I knew a lot more when I was in my 20s than I do now.
That's a lot of us, right? We definitely learn more as we grow older.
But I do want to give a quick shout out, since this is UCLA for a second, and I covered this in the acknowledgments of my first book. I'm dyslexic, okay? 1 out of 3 Fortune 100 CEOs is dyslexic. We think differently. It's a gift, not a curse. But it also meant spelling, writing, and reading, like, you know, every language was a foreign language. But at UCLA, I wrote for the Daily Bruin. Nice. I knocked out 300 plus stories. I had editors that just, you know, taught me how to write as if I was in first grade. And that skill has served me more through life than any other, because you have to know how to communicate. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, the biggest mistake young entrepreneurs make is, and I was guilty of this for decades, is you leave a meeting and go, why don't they get it? You know, It's not their job to get it. It's your job to communicate to people living in the past in a way that they can comprehend it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And once you put the onus back on you, it really changes how you approach implementing change and creating change.
That's a really good point, Jay. I mean, there's so many founders and business owners that I've seen pitch, and they just don't have those communication skills. They don't know what to focus on, what to be trying to communicate to investors, and being able to, even making eye contact is hard for some of them. So are there particular tips you would recommend to someone who, they created their product or service, they now are looking for investment and starting to do these pitches?
So in Disrupt You, I cover a topic that I call OPM, other people's money. So usually people go out to raise money by either giving up equity, crowdfunding, pre-selling, but there are giant corporations that will give you millions of dollars that they don't want back, that they don't want any equity for, it's just free money. And here's how it works. Anytime you're starting a company, you're going after a specific target audience for your product, your demographic, whatever that may be. Guess what? Those people aren't just buying your product, but there's other non-competitive stuff. You make shoes for old people need glasses, whatever it might be. So you can go to those giant companies that are in that space that have that audience, but don't have a new idea. Solve for them, and they solve for you. So I'll give you a great example. When Steve Jobs came out with iTunes, it wiped out the Walkman. Sony brought me in. How do we launch an iTunes second? How do we get into this? And Apple was spending $100 million a year just on advertising iTunes.
Yeah.
My budget was $0.00. So I said, okay, just as I gave Vin the advice in Future Proofing You, who's out there that's in trouble? Because people that are in trouble are open to new ideas. So that year, there were two companies that came to mind. Spurlock had done a movie called Super Size Me. McDonald's sales were down for the first time in history. They were down 9%, huge. The other was United Airlines was in bankruptcy and people weren't flying. So now all that I have to do is, how do I solve for their problems and get those companies to spend money on my music store?
Yeah.
Just have to connect it up. So buy a Big Mac, get a free track, get a little code. They'll do the TV commercials. They'll do the tray liners. They'll do the signs in every store. They'll spend $60 million in opening week. They drove 20 million paying customers to my new store.
Amazing.
Cost me nothing. United stole this idea from Sir Richard because he couldn't pull it off and had it in the back pocket. I said, okay, I can pull this off now. Did the first concert in the sky. Had Sheryl Crow perform from Chicago to LA. We did the concert. We filled the plane with the press. And the results were, we got millions and millions of impressions and tons of customers.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Jay, it's like a kind of a new way for a lot of businesses that don't think about funding, right? They all think about.
Yeah. And we repeated that over with 100 different corporations, from tampons to pens. I mean, you just find somebody that doesn't have an idea.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Well, and so many of these businesses they're kind of realizing the benefit of innovation these days and are looking for people to.
Well, it's really tough to innovate when innovation is by definition a cost center. Yeah. So that's all being cut out. A lot of your companies make cool innovation centers to show somebody. It's got a foosballs, an orange painted wall, a conference room made out of a shipping container, and no original ideas. I've been at the top of companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, and very few have the job of doing anything new.
Yeah.
They're run on autopilot.
Yeah, so true.
And, think of Google. Google had the greatest business model of all time. Desktop advertising. They owned it. They were printing money like, nobody ever saw. But one day they woke up and go, wait a second, nobody's using their desktop anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody's on a phone. We're going to go out of business. So they spent a fortune and bought Android. There's a reason why these acquisitions are made, because they could have been done in-house, but the stock market doesn't favor investment.
Yeah. Well, it's so much more cost effective often to do the acquisition, right, than to build out something yourself. And that, so it sounds like, not only businesses have to go through these cycles of kind of restructuring and reformulating themselves. But something that has been talked about more often in the past several years, particularly around the future of work, has been that individuals are having to go through this whole restructuring themselves too. So maybe as children, it's not so much, hey, I want to grow up and be, an astronaut. I want to be a cop. There are probably maybe 5 things they need to pick and 5, transitions they may need to go throughout their career.
You hit one of my pet peeves. I hate when adults ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
The question should be, what problem do you want to solve when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
Even the smallest child sees injustice in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the mentality. So yes, I'm old enough that it used to be if you saw more than 2 or 3 jobs on somebody's resume, it's like, oh, here's a red flag. Apple, Google, Facebook, the #1 place recruiting the tops of the class, the average tenure is still less than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's with, free food and washing your clothes and masseuse that comes to your desk and they still can't keep people. So there's a disconnect between what people want to accomplish and what the actual work world turns out to be. So unless you can have a purpose that drives you, and the greatest example of this is you may see an immigrant to this country sweeping the floor or stocking the shelves at a convenience store, whatever that is, but that's not their identity.
Mm-hmm.
Their journey started long before they got there, and that's a stepping stone on a path that they have a goal and they're on a purpose and a mission, which is why 1 out of 3 Fortune 500 companies was either founded by an immigrant or the first generation child.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So find a purpose, and then you can build around from that. And, I'll give you the key to happiness is solving for others. That's how you solve for yourself.
Yeah.
And whether it's in business, whether it's with your employees, whether it's with, finding investors, solve for that other person. I remember I was very young, and I had the meeting of a lifetime with the CEO of Pepsi.
Mm-hmm.
I studied everything. I looked at everything. I knew more about Pepsi than the founder probably did. And I went to Armonk, New York, and I go, and I then didn't realize, but this was the most important meeting of my life. But to the CEO, I was the only thing between him and lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Not the same balance. And I teach people how to change that in every situation, to bring that balance back. Mm-hmm. And it's a very effective technique. And so I don't know why we don't teach people how to create stuff, because we need a whole lot of stuff created in a short period of time.
So true. So true. What do you, tie into all of that? Another recent trend is the remote work trend. And this is something that's happened before too, right? This is not the first time we've had this kind of trend. It's gone before in Silicon Valley, particularly, where people have pushed towards remote work, and then there's been a backlash. Do you think the trend currently is here to stay? Do you think there'll be a change again?
Absolutely. So I have the stats in Future Proofing You, but for the employer, they save about $11,000 per employee. Employees have less turnover. They actually work more hours and have greater productivity. And most important, they have higher job satisfaction. Mm-hmm. Why? Because if you have a unique situation, you have a special needs child, you have somebody elder care, you're not spending the 82 minutes on average each way that somebody commutes in this world. So they come through that traffic, come to work miserable, or come home even more miserable. Mm-hmm. So I think you'll see long-term reduction in divorce rates. You'll see all kinds of societal changes. So that's here to stay, but that's a huge advantage for the startup. You don't need rent. You don't need some edifice somewhere that costs you a fortune. You can create a completely virtual company. I list in Future Proofing You the 20 pieces of software that are free for startups and basically free. They're really to run every aspect of your business in the beginning. Yeah. So the world's set up for it right now. And if you're not taking advantage of it here, sure as heck people are everywhere else in the world. So the US only has one competitive advantage left. We don't have the best educational system. We don't have the best, we don't have all the money in the world. We don't. One thing that we have is we have Homer Simpson, or in my generation, Lucille Ball. Mm-hmm. We don't have the same fear of failure and public embarrassment of other cultures. Mm-hmm. Homer comes up with a get-rich-quick scheme. It fails miserably, and life goes on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In many countries, that's the antithesis. I've worked with foreign governments. I helped set up Entrepreneur Week in Mexico. Mm-hmm. Their biggest industries are oil going away, assembly of factory stuff going away, and repatriation from people that leave. Tough problem. So they need to create entrepreneurs. So now with the same fair and fair of Shark Week on Discovery, I mean, presidential speeches, awards to kids, creating stuff in schools, changing the mindset that this is doable. Yeah. You know, some kid was really good at playing baseball in the Dominican Republic, and there's a poor nation, a whole generations of youth saw that as a ticket out. Now there's a lot of baseball players. So people just need to see that it can be done.
Yeah.
You know, the advantage of Silicon Valley is a multi-generational ecosystem of founders reinvesting in the next generation of founders.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a particular environment there. And another thing I think is kind of interesting that we've had to kind of deal with, and I don't know what your kind of thoughts are on it. We do see different approaches in different countries to particularly emerging tech industry and spaces, and how, you know, laws and regulations are being applied in those different spaces.
One of the nations that I tried to work with the government to change the policy, if you're investing in a startup, they tax 30% on that money before the startup gets it. Wow. So the landed wealthy believe that they can stop innovation. They will always be wealthy and in control. In a borderless world, this is just insanity. But, you know, yeah, countries have very different approaches to it. Israel, after the US, has more companies going public on New York Stock Exchange than any other. You know, every Israeli has 3 startups. I mean, it is, you know, if I'm in a cab there, the cab driver's pitching me a business. The guy who's carrying my luggage into the hotel's pitching me a startup. And his brother's got an even better one when I take a meeting. It's just a different approach. So yeah, cultural limitations. Australia, I toured there extensively on the last book. And they have an expression that drove me crazy. No one wants to be the tallest poppy. They don't want to stand out. They have a belief if you stand out, you get your head chopped off. So they don't promote their startups. I mean, they've had one unicorn startup that's become $1 billion company, but so ingrained is this, you know, not wanting. So take advantage of that gift that we have that, you know, Henry Ford, Walt Disney, their first companies, bankrupt. I mean, I tell this story often, but at the beginning of my career, there were 2 guys that had a genius startup. It was called Trafo Data. Mm-hmm. What if you hook up computers to traffic lights to synchronize traffic and reduce traffic in cities? Mm-hmm. Not a single city planner understood it. So Bill Gates and Paul Allen's first company went belly up. Mm-hmm. The next one, Microsoft, did a wee bit better. So there's no shame in failing. Yeah. I would rather invest money in somebody who's already had a failure than a first-time CEO.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think there are particular countries' approaches that put other entrepreneurs in particular countries in advantage? Because one thing I hear often is, hey, you know, there are sandboxes in some of the Asian countries for some of this. So those entrepreneurs and businesses have an advantage, but then in many of those countries, they also are then controlled by the government. So there's less separation between a business and the government.
Every country has a system to benefit somebody. So we can all point to one product. I mean, why is California wine so cheap? Because we all spend billions making irrigation and stuff so that people get their water. All your wine in France is rain, right? So we're subsidizing each bottle to whatever, right? You know, we export our valuable water in the shape of almonds. You know, it takes a gallon per almond. So China doesn't have to waste their water. I mean, so you can always look at the imbalances of what we do. There's not a farmer in the US that made a nickel last year, all subsidized. So, you know, but here's what's going to happen over the next 5 years. Food costs are going to go through the roof. They'll double over the next 18 months, and then they'll double again.
Yeah.
So the Arab Spring didn't happen because of peace and freedom or somebody getting some awakening. Governments couldn't afford to subsidize the food for the poor because climate change, they had no crops. Mm-hmm. Every nation state is only 3 meals away from a revolution. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see this real change. I didn't want to be chairman of another company, but when an engineer who worked for me 20 years ago came to me with a solution for taking the poison out of our food and having more food grown, I felt morally obligated to step in, and Greenfield Robotics, instead of growing food with poison, think about that. We have enough to kill everything but us. No, it kills us. What if you just have little robots go up and down the rows and cut the weeds? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. Imagine like little Teslas. And that's what Greenfield Robotics does, so that your corn and your Milo, I mean, we get 80-something% of our calories globally from 11 crops. You can map, as climate changes, where those crops presently grow, where they won't grow.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's devastating. So the politicians can argue about stuff that'll get them elected here and now and whatever, but unless entrepreneurs solve these problems, it's not pretty. Now, it may not affect the US as much as other places. Mm-hmm. We now export tons of food to other countries. But what happens to stability in nation states when they can't feed their people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like we are definitely, some hard times going ahead if we don't start adapting and creating some innovation to address all of this.
But hard times are when people are open to new ideas, which is the greatest time to be an entrepreneur.
So true, Jay, so true. So we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to open it up to audience questions. Put your question in the chat and I'll ask Jay. So we have one right now from Ruben, Jay. Ruben says, Jay, you mentioned 80% of legal jobs will be lost to AI. What do you envision the remaining 20% to be?
I don't see, so technology and innovation gets ahead of laws and regulations by 20 years. It always takes governments a long time to catch up. So I don't see the legal system, the courtroom system, the criminal system, I don't see that getting automated out of existence very quickly. When we're talking about corporate legal, when we're talking about, how many times can the same contracts and if you've run a public company, you're spending a fortune each year on legal and accounting and audit that you're required to do. That's all just going to be software. Your real estate industry, some states still require you can't buy and sell a house. It goes through a lawyer as opposed to through a realtor. Both of those fields are automating away. So any place where you can take fat out of the middle, it will be flattened. So I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions from the audience?
And by the way, the big law firms know this, because go talk to someone that's trying to make it to partner nowadays, right? Any career where, it takes you a while to get to something, you're going to want to milk that cow for as many years as you can, which means that the people at the bottom aren't going to make it to the top.
We have a question from Kathleen asking, Jay, how do you see the entertainment industry adapting?
Say it again.
How do you see the entertainment industry adapting?
Oh, so if anybody's paid attention here, brings in lawyers and entertainment. The decline of the box office has been going on for quite some time. The death nail in the coffin was the pandemic. So you say, okay, so less people go to movies, but there's all those other windows, there's streaming, there's da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I watched this happen in the music industry, which was the canary in the coal mines, and you took physical dollars of buying an album, and even if you had zero piracy and you just could buy the one song you wanted, not the filler, you suddenly replace $15 with 99 cents. If you take that, no one steals the bad songs, so they're stealing the good songs, that dollar really represents, now down to 1 cent. So you're not going to have the same number of players. You're already seeing, when Disney buys Fox, more importantly, their library, You know, you'll now watch somebody will finally buy Sony's library, the largest post-World War II color library. That this stuff becomes cannon fodder to sell something else.
Yeah.
Amazon doesn't greenlight something to get ratings and to sell ads. They greenlight something that will get them an audience that they don't presently have. Yeah. If they want to move into fly fishing and they're not selling any lures, then they should have a fly fishing show, because then they'll take more of that retail dollar. Netflix, on the other hand, is what do I need? It's the HBO model. What do I need? Enough good content to just get you paid for one more month.
Yeah.
And they're spending billions more than the other guys can with the box office. So will humanity always need entertainment? Absolutely. Will we always need music? Absolutely. Does that mean that it will create the massive profits? And you know, people that, you know, the first African-American woman to become a millionaire was a singer, because nobody expected records to sell that well. Yeah. So an industry was born. Yeah. I think you're going to see, you know, further consolidation, further layoffs, and less innovation at the top end. At the flip side, the cost, the means of production, studios for too long were centers of banking and distribution. Everybody now has access to global distribution. Yeah. Right? Put it on here, get it to the whole world. Look at the crazy stuff, you know, Gangnam Style. Look at the stuff that just goes viral. So you may not need those big companies to create art. Yeah. And more importantly, art for a specific niche. You can now find that niche. There may not be a major city that has a 24/7 jazz radio station, because there's not enough jazz fans in any one city. But you could have an internet station and have all the jazz fans of the world. So there's both sides to it, but there's always opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very kind of interesting to see how it develops, because right, the studios are going to innovate, the creatives are going to innovate, and there's definitely deep fake technology is getting more and more.
There was a time when Coca-Cola and Gulf Western Oil Company, these were the companies buying entertainment. Yeah. You know, it may be, you know, think of self-driving cars. If you're not looking out the window, you need to be entertained, because moving your meat puppet somewhere still takes the same amount of physical time. Yeah. So they're going to become portable entertainment centers. Would it make sense for a Tesla to own a studio library? Yeah. I wrote in the 1990s that AT&T would buy Warner Brothers. Finally worked on that merger. I showed them the article that I wrote way back when. They're like, how did you know? Well, you own the railroad tracks. They make the cargo. Yep. It's an inevitability. I just happened to pick the right studio and got lucky. Yeah. But yeah, it's going to happen much faster than people realize.
Yeah. Well, we've hit 1 o'clock. Thank you, Jay, for joining us today. And we really appreciate your time and a great discussion. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Please make sure to attend future events we're going to be doing for the UCLA Westside Bruins on September 8 at noon. We're going to be doing one with Pamela Bowen about medtech and the developments, particularly with the pandemic, that have happened in that space and that will be happening in the healthcare and medtech space moving forward. And please make sure to check out Jay's new book, Future Proofing You. Thank you, everyone.